There is one photograph that should exist and doesn't. Think about that for a moment. After 4 years of silence, 4 years of an aging king longing for grandchildren he barely knew, the doors of Highgrove House finally opened. Harry walked up that drive. Meghan walked beside him, and 2 small children, 7 and 5 years old, met their grandfather for the first time since they were bobbies. It is the single most emotional royal image of the decade. The picture that would have been on every front page on Earth. The picture a palace desperate to show healing would have released within the hour. And it does not exist. No photograph, no official quote, no warm line about how moved the king was. Nothing. Just silence and a strict no-camera rule and anonymous sources doing the talking instead of the family. So ask yourself the question that nobody wants to ask. If this was the joyful reconciliation the headlines are selling, why is there not a single image of it? And why, according to reports, did the King of England lay down a list of conditions before his own son was allowed through the gate? Because the deeper you look at what happened at Highgrove that afternoon, the less it looks like forgiveness, and the more it looks like a test that Harry only barely passed. Let me take you inside it. Let us start with the version the world was given, and on the surface it was beautiful. A king who has been quietly battling cancer, 77 years old, finally getting to hold his grandchildren after 4 long years apart. Archie, who was a toddler the last time Charles saw him, now a schoolboy of 7. Lilibet, who was a baby in arms, now nearly 5, old enough to actually remember the day. It is the kind of story that writes its own headline, Family Healed. And there is a truth in it that nobody should sneer at, because at the end of everything, when the crowns and the titles and the arguments are stripped away, family is all any of us have. That part is real. Except according to the reporting, that is not quite what happened. Not at all. Because before a single car turned into that driveway, sources say King Charles laid down the rules. Not hopes, not suggestions, rules. The king made it clear to his son that there could be no drama. No hint whatsoever that the visit was being used for personal gain. And here is the part that lands like a stone. If a single camera showed up, if there was even a whiff of trouble, if one carefully placed quote appeared in a friendly magazine, one leaked photograph, one Instagram post, one anonymous briefing to a sympathetic outlet, then the whole thing was over. Immediately. No second chances. Now sit with what that actually means, because it is devastating. This was not a father throwing his arms open to a son he had missed for years. This was a monarch drawing a line in the sand and telling his own child exactly how far he was allowed to step across it. This was a man who wanted to see his grandchildren so badly that he was willing to open his home, and who trusted his own son so little that he felt he had to spell out the terms in advance. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Charles did not just quietly hope Harry would behave himself. According to those close to the situation, he had it communicated explicitly, spelled out, made unmistakable. And that single fact tells you everything about how much trust is actually left between them. Because you do not set conditions like that for someone you trust. Think about your own family for a second. If your son were coming to visit you, would you send a message beforehand telling him not to bring cameras, warning him not to sell the story, making clear that one wrong move ends the visit permanently? Of course you wouldn't, because you set terms like that for someone who has burned you before and who you are not willing to let burn you twice. One royal commentator described the family's inner world in a way that has stayed with me. He said the royals have a very small circle of people they can trust, and that once you are inside that circle, you stay inside it. It is meant to be for life. And then he said this: Harry has smashed that circle with a hammer. So when the newspapers call this a reunion, hold that image in your mind. A hammer, and a circle in pieces on the floor. But if the rules were harsh, the silence afterwards was even more revealing. And this is where it gets genuinely strange. Because think about the palace's own interests here. Buckingham Palace is one of the most sophisticated public relations operations on Earth. They understand imagery better than almost any institution alive. And they had in their hands the single most powerful royal photograph available in years. A frail, ill king holding the grandchildren he had waited 4 years to meet. Grief and hope in one frame. It would have healed 100 bad headlines. It would have moved a nation to tears. And they released nothing. An insider put the palace's position in words that I think are the key to this entire story. Charles, they said, was willing to extend an olive branch, but he was not willing to be embarrassed or blindsided again. And then came the line that really matters, the one that pulls back the curtain completely. Nobody, they said, should mistake that for blind trust. Read that again, because of who is saying it. That message did not come from a critic. It did not come from a hostile newspaper or a gossip channel. It came, through people close to him, from the king's own side. The palace itself made sure the world understood that this was not a full reconciliation, that it was a carefully managed, closely supervised visit with an exit clause built into it from the very beginning. That is not what the healing of a family rift looks like. That is what damage control looks like. And there is another layer here, one that is quietly brutal, because that arrangement did not just control the visit, it controlled the story. There would be no Instagram post from Montecito, no exclusive spread in a glossy magazine, no friendly source giving a warm account of the afternoon. The palace, and only the palace, would decide what the world was told, every detail locked behind those walls. Now, why would you insist on that? There is only one honest answer, because you do not trust the other person to tell it fairly. And so, in the days that followed, notice what actually reached the public. Not the family's joy, not a father's relief, just the word private, repeated twice, and a source doing the talking. That is not two people rebuilding something together. That is one side protecting itself from the other. And Harry, remember, walked into that house knowing every single one of those terms, knowing his father did not trust him enough to let the visit happen without ground rules, knowing that one slip could end the whole thing. He drove up that gravel drive with his wife and his 2 small children, and he did it on somebody else's terms, in his own father's house. That is not a warm, welcome home. That is walking on eggshells in the driveway you grew up visiting. And there is one more detail buried in all of this that almost nobody has picked up on. And when you hear it, the whole power dynamic snaps into focus. Harry had to ask. Think about that. He was the one who had to request the meeting. It was not offered to him out of the blue. It was not a father reaching across the ocean saying, "Please, come, bring the children, I miss you." It was a son, 4 years estranged, having to raise his hand and ask permission to bring his own children to meet their own grandfather, and then having to wait to see whether the answer would be yes, and on what terms. One commentator used a much harsher word than ask. He said Harry had to beg. I would not go that far because we simply do not know how that conversation went, and it is easy to be cruel from a television studio. But strip the cruelty out of it and the underlying point stands. The person who wanted this was Harry. The person who held the power was Charles, and the terms flowed one way only. And why were those terms so tight? Well, here is the context that the whole thing sits inside, and it is genuinely damning. Because in the days immediately before that afternoon, there had already been an ugly, public mess. There had been the row over where the family would even stay, an offer of a royal residence that was extended, and then, at the 11th hour, withdrawn. There had been dueling statements, and crucially, there had been allegations swirling that Harry's own camp had leaked details of the arrangements to selected outlets before anything was settled. Whether or not those allegations are fair, and Harry's side would dispute them, this is what the palace was reacting to. A royal aide was quoted saying that the king's patience had, in their words, snapped. That he wanted to be a loving father and a loving grandfather, but that it was being tested beyond endurance. Now look at the conditions again. No cameras, no leaks, no briefings, no personal gain. They are not random. Every single one of them is a direct response to something that had already gone wrong that very week. Those rules were not born of coldness. They were born of experience. Charles was not guessing at what might happen. He was defending against what had just happened days earlier in full public view. And that, perhaps, is the saddest thing of all, because a man does not build a fence unless something has already got in. But if you think that was the coldest part of that afternoon, you have not yet heard about the brother who was 2 hours away. Because while Charles was quietly rewriting the terms of forgiveness inside Highgrove, Prince William was sending a message of his own. And he was not whispering it through anonymous sources. He was living it, in public, in front of the cameras. On the exact same day that Harry's children were meeting their grandfather for the first time in 4 years, William was at the Guards Polo Club playing in a charity match, being cheered on by Catherine. Smiling, relaxed, completely, deliberately present somewhere else. And here is the detail that tells you everything. Highgrove is roughly 2 hours' drive from where William spent that afternoon. 2 hours. That is shorter than many people's daily commute. 2 hours between a brother meeting his father and a brother who could not have made it clearer that he had absolutely no intention of being in the same county. And across the entire 5 days that Harry was in Britain, the two brothers who once shared a childhood, a mother's funeral, and a military uniform did not cross paths a single time. Not by accident, not because the diaries clashed. By choice. Ask any royal commentator watching that unfold and they will tell you the same thing. That was not a coincidence. That was a statement. Togetherness on one side of the country, and on the other, a brother he was not willing to go anywhere near. And according to those same commentators, William's private reaction to the whole Highgrove afternoon can be summed up in one word: furious. Now I want to be careful here, because these are commentators speaking, not the palace. Kensington Palace has said nothing. William has said nothing. These are the words of royal watchers and former courtiers, and you should weigh them as exactly that, informed speculation from people who follow this family closely, not confirmed fact from the man himself. But the theme was repeated again and again by different voices, and it went like this. To William, his father meeting Harry did not feel like healing. It felt like a reward. A reward, in their words, for bad behavior. And whether or not you agree with that reading, you have to understand where it comes from, because it did not appear out of thin air. This is a man who watched his brother publish a 600-page memoir picking apart the most private moments of their family for the world to buy, who watched interviews air on international television, airing grievances that had always stayed behind palace doors, who sat in silence while an accusation of racism was made against an unnamed member of his own family, an accusation nobody could answer without naming names and making it worse, who has spent years absorbing the fallout, quietly, every single time Harry decided the public needed to hear his side. And one commentator made a point that lands harder than all the rest. Some of the people damaged by all of this, he said, are not even here anymore to defend their own legacy. Think about who that means. A grandmother in the final months of her life. A grandfather already gone. So when Charles opens the door at Highgrove, even quietly, even under strict conditions, William reportedly does not see reconciliation at all. He sees his father rewarding the exact behavior that caused the wreckage in the first place. And for a man who will one day be king, a man who has worried for years about leaks and briefings and books, who knows he cannot have family members causing controversy when the crown is on his head, that is not a small thing. It is a warning about his own future reign. One commentator put William's imagined position bluntly. If I were him, he said, I would be thinking, you have hurt this institution, you have hurt my father, you hurt my grandmother, and now you are being welcomed back. I would be raging, absolutely raging. Again, those are a commentator's words, not William's, but you can see the logic. And you can see why the polo match 2 hours away was not really about polo at all. Which brings us to the man in the middle, and to the most genuinely tragic part of this entire story. Because whatever you think of any of them, spare a thought for King Charles. Because he was handed a choice with no good answer in it. Look at what was actually in front of him. On one side, he could refuse. He could hold the line, stand with William, and tell Harry that trust must be earned before doors are opened. And that has a certain integrity to it. But it also means this. He would be a 77-year-old man, living with cancer, who chose pride over his own grandchildren. He would be remembered, possibly forever, as the king who let a family quarrel keep him from ever holding Archie and Lilibet. And if the worst were to happen, if his health turned, that decision could never be undone. Not ever. On the other side, he could open the door, and he would get his grandchildren, but he would risk alienating the son who actually stayed. The son who never left, never briefed, never sold a word. The son who has stood beside him through everything, and who would watch his father embrace the brother who walked away and quietly wonder what loyalty was even worth. There was no version of this where everybody walked away satisfied. There was no clever solution. There was only a choice between two kinds of loss. And Charles chose his grandchildren. He chose the version that got him that afternoon on his terms, with an exit clause attached, and he accepted that William's anger was simply the price of it. One commentator, even while criticizing the decision, said something I found quietly devastating. "He is not a bad man," he said. "He is not an uncaring man. He loves his son, but his son has put him in a very, very difficult position." And another put the human truth of it in the simplest possible terms. "I am a parent," he said. "I cannot imagine what it would be like to not speak to one of my children, to not see my grandchildren for 4 years." That is the wound underneath all the strategy, all the conditions, the silence, the polo match, the anonymous sources. Underneath it is an ill, aging man who simply wanted to see 2 small children before it was too late, and who has learned, painfully, that in this family even love now comes with terms and conditions attached. So let me tell you what I think actually happened at Highgrove that day. It was not a family healing. It was a family managing damage from 3 different directions at once. Charles was managing his legacy, his health, and his remaining time. William was managing his fury while performing calm at a polo field. And Harry was walking into a house where the rules had been written before he arrived, hoping that 4 years of distance might be enough to earn back something that once was simply his by birth. Because real family does not come with a no-camera clause. It does not come with a warning that one wrong move ends the whole thing. When your child comes home, you do not send terms in advance. And that is why, when the headlines call this a reunion, I think they are missing the story entirely. Now, in fairness, and this matters, let me give you the other side of it, because there is one. Harry came. He accepted terms that must have been humiliating for a grown man of 41, terms that told him plainly that his own father did not fully trust him, and he accepted them anyway. Why? Because he wanted his children to know their grandfather. Whatever else you believe about him, that afternoon cost him his pride, and he paid it willingly for 2 little children who will now have a memory of a grandpa in a beautiful garden. And the conditions, he kept them. No cameras appeared, no photographs leaked, no glossy spread emerged, no source rushed to a friendly magazine. Whatever the palace feared, it did not happen. Harry did exactly what he said he would do. And maybe, just maybe, that is how trust begins to rebuild. Not with a grand gesture or a tearful reconciliation, but with a man quietly keeping his word when nobody expected him to. So here at the end is the truth as I see it. The question was never whether the reunion happened. It did. 2 children met their grandfather, and no photograph on earth was needed to make that real. The real question is what it cost. It cost Harry his pride, walking into his father's home under conditions set by other people. It cost Charles his peace, knowing that the son who stayed would watch and burn. It cost William something too, watching from a polo field 2 hours away, carrying an anger he could not say out loud. And it cost all of them the thing that was supposed to be unconditional in the first place. The simple, ordinary certainty that when you come home, the door is open and no one is checking your pockets on the way in. Because that is what has really been lost here. Not a photograph, not a title, not even 5 days in July. Trust. Trust is the only thing in this story that cannot be granted by a king, negotiated by lawyers, or restored by an afternoon in a garden. It is built slowly over years, out of 1,000 small moments of showing up and keeping your word. And once it is smashed, as that commentator said, with a hammer, no amount of open doors can simply glue it back together. What happened at Highgrove was not forgiveness. It was a beginning at best. A supervised, conditional, camera-free beginning between a father protecting what is left of his health and his reign, and a son discovering that rebuilding a bridge, even to your own father, comes with a price list attached. But here is the thing that gives me a flicker of hope, and I will leave you with it. Harry passed the test. Whatever the rules were, whatever the humiliation of them, he walked in, he kept his word, and he walked out with his children having met their grandfather. And the door, notably, was not slammed behind him. It was left ajar. And maybe that is how these things actually work. Not with a grand embrace on the palace steps, but with one careful, conditional, mistrustful afternoon that goes better than anyone expected. And then another. And then another. Until one day, years from now, nobody remembers there were ever any rules at all. Trust is not rebuilt in a single afternoon, but it has to start somewhere. And perhaps in a garden in Gloucestershire, with no cameras and no headlines and 2 small children running about, it quietly did. Thank you so much for watching. If this story gave you something to think about, please subscribe the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. And let's keep them kind. Do you think King Charles was right to open the door on his own terms? And can you ever see William and Harry finding their way back? See you in the next video. And do let me know in the comments what you'd like the next one to be about. Until next time, take good care of yourselves.